We are on the session on biodiversity, pollution, and habitat loss. This is also one of the themes for WIOGEN. And here the focus is to see how ocean governance can bring in strategies to conserve biodiversity, to reduce habitat loss, as well as reduce pollution. So we are going to have 3 presenters in this session. Each presenter is going to have 10 minutes to present, and 5 minutes we'll use it for question and answer. And after every presenter, we'll have question and answer session. So that's how we'll go. So I would like to introduce the first speaker. Is Jean in?
Yes, hello, Juliet, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Good. Yes.
Good.
So welcome, Jean. Jean is going to talk about using One Health for sustainable mangrove management in Kenya in the context of towards co-producing knowledge in a multidisciplinary network. So I'm going to let you continue, Jean.
Okay, I have to try how I can share my screen here most easily. So, one moment. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Let me see. Okay, so I'm going to speak about One Health for sustainable mangrove management in Kenya and about co-producing policy-relevant knowledge. At least that's what we hope to do. So I'm presenting on my own today, but of course it was a group endeavor. So for this presentation, I collaborated with my colleagues Maarten van Hove, Cosmas Munga, and Farid Dardou-Gebas. But for the whole project, we have a collaboration with Kemfree and with the Technical University of Mombasa, and also with 3 Belgian universities. Myself, I work at the Open University of the Netherlands and at the University of Hasselt and at VUB in Belgium. Okay. So first I'm going to speak about what One Health is and why it could matter, especially for Kenyan mangroves, but also beyond only Kenya. And I will discuss some preliminary results from an expert survey that we've done last May. And I will discuss some next steps, which will hopefully also open the floor for some comments or questions. So first of all, One Health. So the concept of One Health is not known by everyone by name, I would say, but I think the principles and the main ideas of One Health will be familiar to most of us here at WIOGEN. So One Health is basically a concept that tries to unite environmental health, so healthy ecosystems, with human health and also animal health. And in the middle, you could say that, well, this is One Health coming up there. So yes, it's kind of a buzzword, but it's also an interesting concept. And it can be operationalized in, for example, indicators and in very tangible, very concrete actions. At least that's what we hope. So another way of presenting it is in this figure, which was drawn by the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. So you can see that there are both risks and benefits when human and nature interact very closely. So this interface between human health and animal health and environmental health sometimes is very positive. For example, a healthy environment may mean that people are more healthy, mentally healthy, but also physically healthy. But it can also mean that there's a stronger risk of zoonosis, of disease that can be transmitted from animals, for example, to human beings, and vice versa. So there's both risks and benefits there. I cited the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, but also UNEP and many other organizations have talked about One Health, and also the World Health Organization now uses this concept quite often. You could also say it combines different SDGs, so the Good Health SDG, which is SDG 3, but also the biodiversity-related SDGs, which most of us probably know. So here's a very quick example of what One Health can mean in theory. It's also a shameless self-promotion for our team, because Maarten van Hove and myself are also co-authors here. But just to give you a quick idea, you have 2 axes here. So the x-axis is about the mobility. Are we speaking about the global or the local level? No, sorry, that's the y-axis. And the x-axis is about connectedness with nature. And basically, this was a paper in which we said that, yes, indeed, COVID-19 originated at the interface between humans and nature. So it could be a risk, which is, coming from this link between humans and nature. But the solutions to such diseases and new diseases also come from a novel reconnection with nature, where we have, as humans, a more sustainable and a more moderated link to nature. So I will not go into detail here, but you can find the paper online if you want to. So let's go back to what we are for here. So what I wanted to ask is, like, why does One Health matter for mangrove management? So when people think of mangroves, people think of all the ecosystem services, all the benefits that can be provided by mangroves. There's been lots of research on that. For example, when it comes to storm protection, but also carbon storage, mangroves play a key role in the blue carbon debate. And you can see here in that figure by UNEP that, well, mangroves also provide timber and forest products. They are nurseries for fish. They play a role in climate regulation and shoreline stabilization, etc. So they have many benefits. But what we wanted to try now is to see, well, maybe there are also health benefits that are a little bit being undervalued or a little bit neglected so far. So that's what we want to see. Can we broaden the scope of these benefits provided by mangrove by bringing in a health angle? And maybe there are also risks associated with mangroves. Maybe it's not only benefits, maybe there are also risks there. Because indeed, next to the benefits to people, like ecosystem services, etc., mangroves are sometimes perceived negatively, or at least were sometimes perceived negatively. Luckily, nowadays, most of the perceptions of mangroves are positive, but it could be negative sometimes. And this is from a paper by Dan Fries from a few years ago. And you can see that in the late 1800s, so in the late 19th century, mangroves were often associated with danger, disease, and with a gloomy kind of mood. So people were not so positive about mangroves as we are now. So mangrove perceptions actually matter. So the way people see mangroves will matter for their conservation. So if mangroves are only seen as a carbon sink, well, you could say that's good because then mangroves will be concerned. Yes, indeed, but mangroves are much more than that. They're also a safe haven for biodiversity, and they also provide many benefits to local people and even to people much farther away from mangroves due to their role in regulatory ecosystem services. So we now zoom in on Kenyan mangroves. So I guess most of you are familiar with the Western Indian Ocean African coastline, but here on the map at the left side, you can see where Kenya's mangroves are located. So there's a huge concentration of mangroves around Lamu, and then there's quite some mangroves around Mombasa and south of Mombasa, where Gazi Bay is located. And the picture above is from Gazi Bay, where many of our Kenyan colleagues work. And below, you can see a picture of Tudor Creek with Mombasa in the distance, where there's also mangroves there in a much more peri-urban setting, in a much less natural setting, you could say, than, for example, in Gazi Bay or around much of Lamu. But you can see that Kenyan mangroves show a whole continuum of degradation. Some are very degraded, some are very well protected, some are heavily used, and other mangroves are much less used. So the Kenyan coast is an interesting case study also to check the One Health approach over there. And Kenya also has a lot of very skilled scientists working on mangroves. So for us, it was also interesting to see, okay, what does that mean? Can One Health actually be an added value there? So we did an expert survey on the relevance of One Health for mangrove management in Kenya, which is a collaboration among multiple institutes. The first step we conducted in May this year, so it was an expert survey. The second step, which we plan to do, is to broaden the scope of stakeholders' input by including other non-scientifically trained stakeholders. And then we also want to work towards One Health indicators for mangrove, maybe to see if these indicators could actually steer and guide mangrove management in the future. So some preliminary findings, because we're still processing the results, and the paper is not there yet. So one of the, I would say, surprises of our survey was that 70% of the respondents had never heard of the term One Health. So you could say, okay, so it means it's not relevant, maybe. Well, it turned out, yes, it was, because once a definition was given, all respondents, remember all these people were scientifically trained people, all respondents did connect One Health IDs with their own work and with mangrove management in general. So the term may not be very well known, but the whole ID was very well known and was considered quite relevant. So some of the responses on why One Health could be relevant for mangrove management, that was an open question, were that unhealthy forests can lead to, well, less nutrition and to bad health. Links were seen with ecosystem-based management and integrated coastal zone management. There was also links with COVID-19, because people lost their formal jobs, at least temporarily, due to COVID-19, for example, in tourism. And mangroves got degraded. And some scientists believe that, well, due to the decline of the regular economy, many people went back to a more destructive use of mangroves, which they hadn't done for years. That was at least one of the hypotheses there. So there was also the relevance of One Health to well, study novel pests in mangroves, so infestation of insects, for example, and what that can mean for ecosystem health, but also for human health. And peri-urban mangroves were seen as especially relevant interfaces where people, ecosystems, and pollutants can actually closely interact. Antibiotic properties of mangroves were mentioned, as were mosquito-borne diseases. So that could be seen as a kind of disservice of mangroves. So then our next questions were about the taxa to operationalize One Health. So taxa, think of like species, for example, or groups of species, or families, for example. And so when it comes to operationalizing One Health for mangrove management, mangrove trees themselves were very often cited as good indicators, for example, or potential indicators. Because if we know much more on mangrove trees, I mean, how they're doing, how their area is, well, declining or increasing, we can directly link that to human well-being, because people use mangrove trees directly, but also indirectly, because the presence of mangrove trees can tell us a lot about fish nursery, for example. Then other taxa that were mentioned include crabs, but also mollusks and fish. And there you have to think of, well, if crabs and fish and mollusks are polluted, and if people eat them, well, of course, then you can have an effect on health. So you can say it's healthy to eat lots of seafood. Yes, it is. Well, on the other hand, when there is like pollutants being eaten by the mollusks and the fish, it could also end up in humans. So there's a clear health link over there. Birds was also seen as one of the taxa to operationalize One Health, because birds can tell a lot about how healthy ecosystems are. So the choice of these taxa to operationalize One Health, this choice was informed by knowledge generation potential. How much can we learn from these taxa? But also by the feasibility. Do we have data on this? Do we have experts, for example, in Kenya, who work on these different taxa? We also asked people about health-related ecosystem services linked to these taxa, and health-related ecosystem disservices linked to these taxa. And food provision, air purification, and the multiple indirect health benefits were often cited when it comes to ecosystem services. And when it comes to disservices, so the negative or potentially negative aspects, mosquitoes were mentioned, but also the probable or possible occurrence of disease-carrying organisms in mangrove-dwelling organisms. For example, think again of fish and crabs, etc. Sulfur dioxide emissions and the bad smell, sometimes in mangroves, was also mentioned. So we also asked about the communication potential of all these taxa. So yes, we can learn a lot from these taxa, but how do we communicate the value of mangroves from a One Health perspective to various stakeholders? Then we got quite some interesting responses there. Just give you a very quick illustration. So one respondent said, you cannot recruit money to study crabs, but you can get millions of dollars from mangroves. So mangroves are seen as important themselves, but when we think of operationalizing indicator taxa, we should also think of the iconicity of all these species or these taxa. And then another respondent said that tourists want to look at crabs in a plate. They want to eat them. And policymakers look at the extractables. What can they get out of mangroves? So we need to take these very practical aspects also into consideration when selecting indicator taxa, for example. And then health-related indicators, for example, linked to food safety, generate a lot of attention, and many respondents also saw some possibilities there. So we also specifically asked people if they had ever heard of zoonoses in mangroves. Zoonoses are a disease that can jump from animal host to human host and the other way around. Well, no respondents raised mangrove-associated zoonoses, but mosquito-borne diseases were mentioned, like dengue, and also bilharzia. There was no knowledge of possible hypothetical occurrence of food-borne trematode infections like paragonimiasis in Kenya. probably because raw mollusks and crabs are typically not being eaten in Kenya. But it is a problem in some Asian countries. Okay, so these were the quick preliminary findings, just to give you a few ideas. Now, to think of the next steps, what we want to do is to gather additional input from other stakeholders, a more diverse set of stakeholders. We also want to operationalize One Health further by proposing very tangible indicators. And we want to open up the debate on the relevance of One Health for mangrove management beyond Kenya. For example, also in countries with a smaller mangrove knowledge base, which is a smaller mangrove coastal science and management community than Kenya. So One Health can be an additional perspective to enrich and improve mangrove management, and maybe also to strengthen communication about the key role of mangroves for human well-being. What One Health can also do is operationalize the shared risk perspective, meaning that if we destroy the environment, for example, we as humans are also at risk of some novel diseases, for example. And healthy ecosystems and healthy human beings often go very well together. Okay, that's my presentation. I hope I stayed within the time. If there's some questions, I'd be happy to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jean, for that presentation. It's a very interesting topic and brings in new ideas on how to holistically look at ecosystems and manage them in that way. So thank you so much. I'm going to open up the space for anybody who has questions or comments for Jean. You can raise your hand and ask. And as we wait for someone, I have a couple of questions to you, Jean. So one thing is about the indicators. This is a very broad way of looking at an ecosystem and managing it. So how do you bring in all those indicators and what is enough? Because if you look at the human aspect, the environment, the ecosystem, how much do you bring into that one pool of indicators?
Yeah, and thank you. That's a good question. And I must admit, we're struggling a bit with that, as are our respondents. So our aim is not to replace existing indicators which work really well to inform mangrove management. That's not our aim. So we are very well aware that many indicators are already there and are working quite well. We're just thinking of maybe can we add some extra indicators which give a little bit more information on that One Health layer of mangroves. And for example, we could think of, for example, the density of certain species of crabs or certain species of fish, etc., and especially focus on edible species, species that are being caught and eaten by people or by mangrove fringing communities, or even by the tourists around the coastal resorts in Kenya, etc., and see if we can say something there about the potential risks or the potential benefits that people can get when eating particular species of fish, for example. So that could be one of the indicators that are there. Others could be like the presence of pathogens, or some pathogens especially present in mangroves. Maybe some pathogens are more present in degraded mangroves near urban areas than in pristine mangroves. Some pollutants may also have direct health effects on animals and humans. So if we can link the concentration of some pollutants to health, that would already be interesting, I think, for One Health indicators.
Thank you so much, Jean. Anybody else with a question? I'm not seeing any hand up. If someone sees a hand up, notify me. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to thank you, Jean, so much for your presentation and everyone for listening up. And we are going to move into the next presenter. We have Kaylee Smith, is our second presenter. Are you here, Kaylee?
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, Juliet.
Okay, good. So Kaylee is going to talk to us about harmonizing marine ecosystem assessments for ocean science reporting and to inform policy. So Kaylee, you can take it away.
Great, thank you very much. Just waiting for a few seconds for things to refresh on my side. I must just say, Jean, your presentation was really interesting. Thank you. And it's quite a nice introduction to what I'm going to talk to you about today too. So it almost leads into some of our work, which is really nice. So thanks. Can you guys all see my presentation in presenter mode, and can you hear me?
We can see it, we can hear you. Just put it on the presenter.
Okay, yeah, I am waiting for it to do that. In the meantime, I'll just introduce myself. So as you have done, Juliet, thank you. I am Kaylee Smith from South Africa, working at the University of Cape Town and with the South African National Biodiversity Institute, SAMBI. And today, I'm actually going to take a step back, and instead of reporting on some of my primary research, we're going to take more of a bird's eye view and provide an overview of some of like the conceptual thinking that we've been doing and how we're advancing this work and trying to harmonize marine ecosystem assessments for ocean science reporting and to inform policy. So something different for me. So I hope you enjoy. So what is the challenge? We know that our marine ecosystems are facing increasing threats from multiple human pressures. They are becoming increasingly degraded and threatened. We need to minimize these impacts, and we need to conserve and protect our ecosystems. And to do this, we need to measure and map ecosystem condition and to conduct ecosystem assessments. But now one of the key challenges is that we really are still trying to navigate how best to do this. The ocean is so vast, largely inaccessible, and marine ecosystems are highly dynamic and complex. And we really just seem to be lacking these comparable ecosystem assessments that also can be applied, at a national level and a regional level. So that is one of the challenges that we're facing. Now, just to provide a brief overview of some of the ways that we are trying to address this challenge. In an international perspective, we know we are constantly bombarded with frameworks and policies and initiatives. And I mean, this is really imperative now with the new UN Decade of Ocean Science. I must say there really has been tremendous effort over the years now and progress in terms of developing indicators, conducting ecosystem assessments. We have the CBD that is now putting forward an updated proposed biodiversity monitoring program and framework with those associated indicators. We have, for example, GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System, and all of those indicators. And now it seems like we can also be adding Jean's mangrove indicators into the mix, adding to the list. So without going into detail here in this bottom image, it's just trying to show you and to provide you with an idea of the types of indicators that are out there, the work that is moving towards developing essential ocean variables, essential biodiversity variables. So there really is a lot of effort and progress happening in this biodiversity monitoring space and ecosystem assessments. Now, just to provide a few examples close to home at a regional level. So in terms of conducting these broad ecosystem assessments in the WIO, with David Obura and his team, they have now started to look at more of a broad ecosystem assessment in the ecoregions in the region, looking at following the IUCN assessment framework of red list of ecosystems. And this basically looks at threat status using specific indicators. And here they are focusing on coral reefs, particularly looking at coral, fleshy algae, and fish as some of the indicator types that are used to inform this framework. Now, if we just move away into the European region, where there has been huge progress here in terms of really developing core indicators, these indicator sets that are used to inform ecosystem condition and ecosystem assessments. And here, for example, with HELCOM, the HELCOM Commission, and specifically with the Baltic Sea and the assessments that they're conducting there, they've really then transgressed to the next level of how we can ascertain good and poor condition, and how we can really just provide an overview of where we have good condition and where we have poor ecosystem condition. And then we also have these grant-funded projects that often carry on for multiple years. So for example, we have the Mission Atlantic project, which is currently also running in South Africa. We are a partner in this project, and they are now following this integrated ecosystem assessment approach. So now they're all quite similar. They all kind of have the same objectives and goals, but each with their own different assessment frameworks and then their own different set of indicators. And this can make it quite tricky. And then to just provide an example at a national level, so using South Africa as a case study here, we conduct the National Biodiversity Assessments every 5 to 7 years, where we are obligated to report on the status and the health of our ecosystems for the entire EEZ of South Africa. So traditionally, we have used cumulative impacts from multiple human pressures, mapping impacts in a spatial context, which is then used to determine ecosystem threat status. We have now also moved, like what is happening in the WIO with Abura and his team, following the IUCN approach, the Red List of Ecosystem approach, where we use these pressure impacts along with some other indicators that we then use to look at ecosystem threat status. So where we have endangered, vulnerable ecosystems, where our ecosystems are actually maybe in better condition, and we can use this to then effectively manage and conserve our marine environment. But now the issue is that we realize that we really do have all these different silos, almost these different groupings and groups of frameworks, policies, initiatives, projects, whether it be the Mission Atlantic, we have our own national biodiversity assessments, we have marine spatial planning in the mix, we also have the EPSA group looking at how ecosystems affect or inform, should I say, ecologically or biologically significant areas. We also then have the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership, which I'm sure you guys will be hearing about more tomorrow in that workshop. And we have the ocean accounting frameworks now, which are also in the mix, that also rely on ecosystem assessments and mapping ecosystem condition. But now the issue is that we actually end up having an overwhelming number of indicators available for us to use. And each group has their own framework, their own assessment methodology, their own set of indicators, like, for example, as we've seen here with the IUCN, the CBD, the National Biodiversity Frameworks, then we have the GOOSE and the EBVs, not to mention the SDGs then and the IPBES framework. So it really does become a mouthful, and you can see how they're all interlinked. And okay, you might not be able to see in detail there, but on the right, the list and the types of indicators that are available to us. And now this is just what's out there and what is currently being used. Not all of them are often operationalized or available for ecosystem assessments. A lot of them don't have the necessary data. So this really is quite a tricky space that we are grappling with here. So we realize these gaps. We need to harmonize these different ecosystem assessments, but also these indicator frameworks. We need to increase standardization. We need to improve comparability between countries and within the region. We need to increase collaboration and, of course, to build capacity. Now, we thought we're not ever going to really fully be able to amalgamate these assessment processes. They each have their own different goals and objectives. But one way that we can do this is to identify cross-cutting indicators that can be used to inform these different groups, like the biodiversity monitoring, like your project-based ecosystem assessments, etc. So this is where we're kind of moving now and how we want to advance this work. So I just want to provide a brief overview of some of the conceptual thinking now that we are doing around this. We're trying to come up with a framework, or at least a systematic process of how we can really take this forward and advance this thinking and start to really collaborate and build on this ecosystem assessment work, not only in South Africa, but also in the Western Indian Ocean region and also in other areas too. For example, looking at maybe establishing indicator working groups, looking at finalizing these assessment approaches. Maybe we can start to really develop comparable methods and approaches across regions, developing and determining overarching goals and objectives. And then this obviously is also linked to the elements of condition. What do we actually want to achieve? How do we want our ecosystems to be for future generations? This then, very important, informs our indicator selection process. And I'm going to touch more on that in the next slide too. And then we just really get down to the details of the assessments, looking at the spatial units for assessments, identifying targets and thresholds for indicators and for the assessments for the ecosystems themselves. So this is just an idea of the overview of like the entire process and how we want to move this forward. Now, looking specifically at the indicators, so thinking about how we can now choose selected indicators in this very overwhelming soup of indicators that are available to us, we are also now starting to develop a conceptual framework in taking this work forward. Like, for example, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but you would maybe start with a specific target ecosystem, like with the Western Indian Ocean assessment, they focused on coral reefs. So you can have a target ecosystem and apply this process where you look at available indicators, bringing in the EOVs and the EBVs and the different indicators used for different projects. And then you really want to look at the purpose and the questions, the time frame, temporal scales, etc. So you will then have your selected core set of indicators. But then what's really important too is to then continue to validate these indicators. We need to test them to see how responsive they are. We need to look at identifying reference states using these conditions, using these indicators. And we also really need to determine thresholds and targets. And this is crucial to these condition assessments where we can really start to distinguish between good and poor ecosystem health or condition. Yeah, so I feel like that was actually a bit of a mouthful, but just in essence of time. So this is just to provide how we're trying to advance this work. And the idea is that we're putting this together in a policy brief. So this is our policy brief in development. It has been drafted, but the idea is that we want to just take it one step further by building on what we have so far, using our national condition assessment workshop, which is actually being held tomorrow and Friday. So it's a bit of a pity that it was overlapping with this conference, because some people here were actually invited to attend. So it's been quite tricky to manage time. But the idea is that we're going to be discussing a lot of these issues, looking at pros and cons of assessments and indicator frameworks, and trying to build on our processes and our thinking to really advance this work. So the idea is that the outputs from the workshop will then feed into the policy brief, and then we will have additional authors and contributors to the policy brief that will then be used to take forward into this publication. So your target group is really the marine research community, management organization, national governments, but also these regional networks and governing bodies like WIOMSA, bringing in WIMS, looking at Cordio, so that we can all start to collaborate and advance this work, and hopefully start to do some really standardized and collaborative and comparable assessments that can be meaningful for management. So yeah, that's about it for me. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I'm always open to discussions, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. It's one of those presentations where you say you get lost in a maze of indicators, but this is a very good strategy into bringing into order some of the things that we do locally and how we can regionalize them and find a common ground to do better assessments that can inform regional policies as well. So I would like to open up the discussion, the question session. So anybody who would like to ask Kaylee a question, you can raise up your hand. I thought I saw a hand up. Okay, as we wait for
there
questions.
is a question by Jean.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, thank you, Kelly, for the presentation. Very interesting indeed. I was also very interested in different steps you have for developing these indicators. But my question is a bit different. I wonder if you link your harmonization of these ecosystems to a possible harmonization of ecosystem services assessment. Is that anyhow linked? Because I know these are actually worlds that are a little bit separate often. And there's many tools to assess ecosystem services, which are often very much linked to one particular place, one reserve, for example. But I just wonder if there are some links there, some or practical links.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, that is a great question. There definitely are links. And I know often when we start to think about bringing that in, it almost just becomes too much and becomes too complicated. And we've got a whole new set of indicators to now deal with. And we actually often end up finding ourselves just taking a step back and saying, okay, maybe let's not bring it into the ecosystem services level just yet. Because yes, they are linked and there's a lot of overlapping concepts and ideas there, but we often find that it is quite separate also to then the space that we're working in, strangely enough, because like I said, there's a lot of overlapping work and thinking around it. But I must say, with the Mission Atlantic project that we are involved in now, they are taking it to the ecosystem services level. And I know, like in that diagram, you know, the Sankey diagram with all the linking of the indicators, they even had a whole nother block linked into that, and how those indicators then link and are connected in that framework to then the ecosystem services too. So I don't play too much in that space. And I must say, when we start going down that line, down that road, I start panicking and I end up maybe moving away from it just because it just becomes too much. And we're still really grappling with these foundational issues and conceptual ideas and trying to take it forward, at a very basic level. So yeah, but I mean, definitely always something that's there and in the periphery and always thought about. And at the end of the day, we realize that obviously when you have healthy functioning ecosystems, in theory, you should be able to be delivering these valuable services. So they are linked in that way. And yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anyone who has a question, raise up your hand.
Any ideas of how we can do this?
Okay, as we wait for more questions, I have I would just like to hear your perception about the indicators that are being proposed for the post-2020 I know there are for coral reefs that have been proposed in there. I don't know if there's other ecosystems that have proposed their indicators to be monitored. Do you think they're representative enough?
That's a very good question. I must say, personally, I haven't dived deep into that framework yet, mostly because number one, we're going to be tackling it in our workshop tomorrow, and on Friday, we actually have a discussion session where we're going to start talking about these different indicators. So far, what I've done is pull out the ones that have been mostly marine related. So I know that there are a lot that are very specific to specific ecosystem types, like the coral reefs and the mangroves and the seagrasses. And then for us and for where we normally play, we often feel left out of that because we normally work in subtropical rocky reef ecosystems. And I know there are still other indicators that are applicable, but we often find that there's a lot of focus on those type of ecosystems, those tropical ecosystem types, which is fine. We obviously just need to build on what we have, that we can maybe test certain indicators in different areas or different habitats or ecosystem types. I do know that a lot of them, it just seems like they're quite difficult to actually operationalize or implement, like for example, like the Living Planet Index, if we want to start applying that, it becomes down to data availability issues again. I know for one, we're going to start looking at, I know in South Africa, we're going to start looking at the Ocean Health Index, which seems to be coming through a lot as a very key marine indicator. So that's going to be quite a nice one. And that's what we want to try to take forward in this process. But yeah, I can't comment fully on whether I think it's representative enough and the extent of them. But look, there's some really great indicators there. Obviously, I do think there's scope to maybe build in a couple more or to improve on some, but to be honest, we're still really battling just to implement and operationalize the ones that we have. So I think we should just start with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Kaylee, for such a wonderful presentation. I think time is not on our side, so we are going to move to the next presenter. We have Malmo Abdallah. Malmo, are you here?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm here with my colleague, Anna Rocha, who is going to be with me, and she'll be presenting with me. So I'm going to leave to her, who is going to start the presentation, and I'll be joining her later. Welcome, Anna.
Okay, good. Okay. So we are going to have this presentation from Malmo and Anna Rocha. It's about marine litter monitoring in the Indian Ocean coast at Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So welcome.
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. We are going to talk a little bit about our marine litter monitoring program here in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. We are actually doing it in Dar es Salaam and also, north and south of Dar es Salaam, so we can have a comparative between. Dar es Salaam is the biggest city, for the ones that are not familiar with Tanzania. Dar es Salaam is the biggest city in Tanzania. And also the one that has the largest population and also the largest waste problem here. We have been doing this for 2 years now. So you obviously, Tanzania is a relatively big country. We have about 40 million people, and we have, sorry, the presentation keeps going on its own for some reason. And we have actually a tropical climate. We have water from the coast, but we also have lakes and rivers all over the country. And we also have a loss of biodiversity that is very significant in the country. And with that, we have lost more than 15 globally registered, this is a country that is among the 15 globally registered the highest number of threatened species, with at least 900 threatened species under the IUCN Red List from 2013. So we have loss of biodiversity coming from human activities, from urbanization, and also from not having a very good environmental program in the country. But we do have a very significant portion that we still need to cover for. One of the issues that we have is that in a city like Dar es Salaam, for example, we have 6.5 million people here, and less than 40% of the city has any sort of waste collection, which is obviously a problem. And then what people do because of that is that they use the rivers as their dumping grounds. And as they use the rivers as their dumping grounds, that litter ends up reaching the ocean, and also being a threat to the coastal species, the underwater life, and all of that. So our aim here with a marine litter monitoring program is to basically build a database of litter in Dar es Salaam, and as I said, north and south of Dar es Salaam, so we have a comparative, and use that database for advocacy with government, with the private sector, so that we basically have a way to get better regulations, to get better waste management systems in place. We currently have the largest database on waste in Tanzania. Our database is being used by the Ministry of Environment, by several other organizations, and also by other government actors for decision making. We also obviously use that for advocacy for single-use plastic bans in the country, and also extended producer responsibility regulations. We understand the importance of the Tanzanian industries for the economy of the country, but that cannot come at a price of threatening the environment and getting infrastructural loss, which is what ends up happening here. And one of the things that happens with the litter that we have being dumped is that we have floods. Those floods end up also threatening people's lives and health. And so that's a problem that really needs to be addressed in a very strong way. So I'm going to pass the word to Mamlo, who is right next to me.
Yes, hello everyone. So as Yana mentioned that we have been doing the marine litter monitoring for about 3 years now, since 2019. And basically, Dar es Salaam, we have a lot of beaches. It was difficult to pick where to start because the situation is too worse. But we set a criteria for selecting the location or the study areas for conducting the survey. And we had the 3 municipalities of Dar es Salaam, where we had almost 4 covered, 4 locations, of which there was Kigamboni, Ilala, and Kinondoni municipalities, and we had to pick one from the outside of Dar es Salaam, that is Bagamoyo. But also we covered 2 rivers, Mbezi River and Msimbazi rivers. The reason behind of picking these 2 rivers was these are the rivers that cut across the whole city, and the one that leading in accumulating the trash to the oceans. So yeah, and why did we pick those sites as the most relevant to our studies? Because we were trying to assess the nature of the beaches. We had to get the beach that had open access to the public, but also easy to remove the trash when we collect. But also we had to get the beach that has at least a wide areas and length that covers at least 600 meters in length, so that we can have at least a much accumulation of trashes of which we can get a large sample. So also we considered that we would like to have the beach that are adjacent to the rivers, and of course these beaches receive most of the trashes from these 2 large rivers. And basically, we had to adapt the methodologies for data collection, as this survey is being influenced by the marine litter, Western Indian Oceans. So we had to adapt the marine litter monitoring programs manual. So most of the methodologies we used in data collection and also analysis of this data were adapted from the manual from SCCT. So the first thing that we had done, we were staying at the beach, each location for 12 days. 2 days we were doing like a collection of each and everything from the site that we mentioned as standing stock survey, and we were almost doing 2 days of extensive work, collecting almost like 200 bags within 2 days and sorting them and doing analysis of them. After that, we had 10 days of doing accumulation surveys, and this that was meant to be with the marine litter monitoring. So we always spent like 4 hours based on the trends of waves, the tides, collecting all the trash from the wet sand area and the dry sand area, and then we do sorting and recording. So generally, we conducted about 22 macroliter accumulation surveys from the so sorry, I was just a bit high and yeah. So we conducted about 22 macroliter surveys since 2019, but also we have managed to conduct 7 mesoliter beach surveys and 7 river surveys from the 2 rivers, but also we managed to do 16 west and brand audit from the standing stock surveys. And our team and our intervention approach, as you can see, we have few people from the office, like 5 people, but also we have youth ambassadors who are always supporting us in carrying out the surveys, but also involve volunteers from the neighbors of the all locations where we conduct surveys. But also we have partnering organizations who are interested to join us in the start of what we do. Yeah, so that's what we have. But also apart from that, we have the engagement programs or awareness programs, of which we do awareness programs to the neighborhood. So we managed to reach about 13 subwards and about 1,705 people engaged in awareness programs since we started this survey. So the good thing about Dar es Salaam is you can imagine you clean the beach today and you expect that you get back tomorrow and you won't find trash or you find a little trash. But the story is not the same. So here we are going to tell you the number of count of litters that we managed to collect since 2019. It's almost it's almost 3 tonnings. Even the total weight of the litter that we collected is 3 tonnings. The total number of bags reaching up to 10,850 units for almost 2 to 3 years. And for 9 quarters of the survey, that is 3 tonnings, and it requires a huge effort from our volunteers and for ourselves to clean this beach. So we analyzed the data, and on the analysis we used the Excels, and we had the spreadsheet adapted from the marine litter monitoring manual, but also we have waste and brand audit, as this is adapted from our organization, the data program developed by our organization for auditing waste. So what we do with this analysis, we collect the count, and also we collect the weight of the trash collected, but also the source of the trash, but also we do the brand audit and the brand and also the producer or the manufacturer of the products. So here you can find the producer of the most of the product especially plastic that have been collected from the survey, METL, who is Mohammed Enterprise Tanzania Limited, producers of the drinking energies or juice or whatever, is a leading number of the companies and going downwards. So
here is important to say that from our surveys, we consistently find that about 70%, 75% of all the waste that we find is actually locally produced, so it's produced in Tanzania, of which about 40% of the waste comes from the two companies that you see here as the first company. So this ranking doesn't really change in all the surveys that we do, in all the audits that we do. It's quite consistent. So you can see that with the producers, and you can also see plastic, like plastic actually accounts for most of the waste found. And there is a mix of branded plastic and unbranded plastic. You can continue.
yeah.
Sorry. I think I go to this one.
Yes. So we can show you that, as Anna mentioned, most of the objects that we find are plastic, and our graphs show that it's about the 41% of the all product of all trash or litter that we collect are plastics, and this implies that there is a huge effort to fight the plastic pollution to our beaches. Yes.
That is talking about branded plastic, because if you
Yes.
look at here, for example, we have phone, we have marine and fishing gear, which is also plastic. So you have other kinds of plastic that are unbranded. So if you actually count all plastic, including the unbranded plastic, it comes up to almost 70% of all the waste. So about 40% is just the actually branded plastic. So here are some of the results from the surveys. We have obviously a report that has the detailed results from this.
So yes, you can find the different, like 4 graphs or 4 charts that show you the data. So each one will represent from each location that we conducted this survey. So don't confuse.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So here we try to show the trend of the weight that we collected since 2019, and maybe you could be surprised, like why this year the number of the weight is so high compared to the previous one. So the reason behind it is we tried to extend our marine litter programs. Before we were doing up to 450 meters because the work was too heavy, so we didn't cover the whole 60 meters, but this time we tried to invest much of effort and energy to try to reach all the 600 meters, but also we extended 2 sites of marine litter programs, of which we got Kigamboni and we got Bagamoyo, of which is far from the city. So bringing all these places together, and also the rainfall that has rained in this in the last month has brought out a large quantity of the trash to the beaches. So
one of the things that we need to always be aware is that as we chose beaches that are adjacent to rivers, some of the main rivers that we have around, so the amount of waste fluctuates with the amount of rain that we have, because our rivers are seasonal. So if you go and see the river right now, you see that there is no water. So basically, you don't have that much waste reaching the ocean. But then at any rain, that changes, and then we have way more. So we have been trying to do some comparisons to be able to see like how much of the waste, like how the rain basically impacts the amount of waste that we find in the ocean. And we have seen that it actually impacts quite a bit. So this is for the river surveys?
Yes. This is just the reservoir survey that we have conducted, 7 river surveys, and that also shows the quantity of the trash we collected since we started. So you can see the trend.
You also see that we have done less river surveys than we have done the beach surveys, and the reason is exactly what I just mentioned. Our rivers are seasonal, so depending on the time, it's not actually possible to do a survey because we don't have enough water to do so.
So here, just to highlight that, as Anna spoken before, this from all the audit we do, or from all the survey we have done, we have observed that 76% of the material being collected are local, from the local manufacturers, and only 24% from the foreign brands. But also most of the plastic of the material collected, about 7% are plastic objects. So you can imagine how much we should put our effort on fighting the plastic pollution. But also sometimes you can see the trend that the trash collected are very low. So it might be likely to sense that maybe the waste problem is being low, is decreasing, but not say that. It might be maybe with the community campaigns that we do. As Nipefagio, we conduct a lot of campaigns, cleanup campaigns. So sometimes we accumulate a low level of the trash, but sometimes if you leave for a moment, and then the rate of accumulation is still high. So we still have a long way to go. But also this time we managed to collect the large number of COVID items related, like masks and other stuffs. So this implies that there is a need for us to fight against the management of the COVID-related items as masks, whatever the eruption increases, no matter how much we have to protect ourselves.
So then moving forward, I think one of the things that we have been using is we need to continue to collect data. As I said, we have the largest database in Tanzania for waste. And so we actually need to keep doing that. So we do the surveys every 3 months, and we hope to continue to do that every 3 months. Our survey is fully digitalized, so we use actually ODK and QGIS to be able to make it very precise, and so then it's very reliable for people to use and for the government to use as well. Keeps moving. We also are hoping to extend the survey more to the north and more to the south of Dar es Salaam, so then we have better comparatives. And this database, like the aim is that it will continue to inform the decision makers, and that is going to be important for the implementation of the extended producer responsibility. The discussion is currently happening in the Ministry of Environment and should be the first draft or the first set of regulations should be released in December this year. A little bit about the public awareness campaign. So Mamlo has already mentioned that. So we also reach the communities that are next to the rivers and the beaches that we work at. So they also understand the reason for us to do the surveys, because like people can see the work being done and also can hopefully engage on advocacy. And we also measure the dump sites that we find in the rivers, along those rivers. So you can see also a mapping here of the dump sites in those rivers. As I said, we have several dump sites along the rivers. We have conducted before some surveys, and we have found in 8 rivers of Dar es Salaam 2,250 dump sites along the river. So it's a significant problem here. And I think that's like pretty much it. So again, as I said, plastic is the main issue. I think the connection between plastic production and climate has been highlighted lately as a very big issue. In Tanzania, about 40% of all the greenhouse gas emissions come from waste. And so it's also important for us to account for that and to think about the relation between plastic production and the climate emergency. We hope that better decision making can be achieved by being data oriented, and we hope that the advocacy results in a cleaner environment in the future. Here are just some of the publications, and that's it from us. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mamo and Anna, for such a robust presentation. I know marine litter is such a hot, very interesting topic at the moment, with WIOMSA having it on its top priority. And your study really did a good job in identifying the sources. And right now we know where marine litter is coming from. So I hope it's going to be easy for decision makers to adopt policies that are going to reduce pollution. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've gone too far with the time. So I'm just going to hang on for like 1 minute to get a really, really pressing question, because the next session starts in like 3 minutes time. So yeah, if someone has a really burning question, I'm going to offer 1 minute for that.
Maybe.
Yes, okay, yes.
I was just wondering, you showed like the total catch of litter. If you break it down like for per effort, or did you observe any trends in the seasons, or like with more tourists coming in, or with, I don't know, in your litter observations at the coast, or is it constant throughout the years?
It's quite constant in terms of the percentage of waste. It's quite constant. The volume changes with the rains. What we have seen is a shift in some of the, for example, when we started back in 2019, in the beginning, we used to have, for example, plastic bags as one of the prevalent items that we find, and then we banned the plastic bags later in 2019. So those started to reduce in volume, but then other kinds of plastics like the energy bottle drinks that Mamlo mentioned started increasing. So at the end of the day, the plastic always dominates. It depends a little bit, like the kind of product may change, but the domination of plastic is still consistent. And the volumes of waste, like if it would be interesting to have a way, which we currently don't have, to actually see, because it's really hard to measure the volume of water in the rivers, but to see with the same volume of water, the amount of waste, to be able to see if the plastic is increasing or decreasing. From observation, we can see that the amount of waste is increasing, but we don't have a scientific way of measuring that.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Malmo and Anna, for that presentation. And thank you everyone else for joining this session and getting to know about all these incredible talks today. And so on the chat, we have the links for the next sessions for you to join. And yeah, all the best.
Looking forward to seeing you in the poster sessions, guys. And thanks for the great talks. Bye-bye. And we'll just wait in here because I think I'm the host of this session now. I'm afraid if I close it, then everybody will just get kicked out and not be able to.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave then.
Thanks for the great moderation. It was really fun.
Okay.
I felt useless in the background.
That's good, but the talks are really good.
Oh yeah, and I think it's also important initiative. So even if it's not always 1000% super scientific, it's really important to get all those messages out. And I think they put in so much effort, everybody.
Yes.
It's really nice to listening to all the stories. Make sure to get something to eat now, because I think it's a seamless transition. So I will run to the kitchen now quickly.
Okay, sure.
Wait until everybody's out and give them a chance to transition.
Okay, sure.
See you there. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.